Most people think leasing a car is cheaper than buying one. The monthly payment is lower, the car is brand new, and it feels like a smarter deal. But when you actually run the numbers, something surprising happens. In many cases, leasing can quietly cost you thousands of dollars more over time, even though it looks cheaper at first. And there is one small detail most people completely ignore when comparing these two options. That one detail can completely change which option is better financially. I will show you exactly what is this in a second, but first, let's look at why leasing seems like the better deal in the first place. Before comparing leasing and buying, it's important to understand what leasing actually is. In simple terms, leasing a car is very similar to renting it for a longer period of time. Instead of paying for the full value of the vehicle, you are paying to use it for a fixed amount of time, usually around 3 years. During that time, you make monthly payments just like you with a loan. The difference is that with a lease, those payments aren't going toward owning the car. They're essentially covering the cost of the vehicle's depreciation while you are driving it. Most leases also come with their certain limits. For example, there's usually a yearly mileage cap, and if you go over that limit, you might have to pay additional fees. At the end of the lease term, you typically return the car to the dealership. Some leases give you the option to buy the car at that point, but many people simply give it back and start another lease on a different vehicle. So, on the surface, leasing can feel simple and convenient. You get a new car, manageable monthly payments, and you don't have to worry about selling it later. But the important thing isn't that you're renting the car, is that you're actually paying for it. When you lease a car, you are not paying for the entire value of the vehicle. Instead, you are mainly paying for how much value the car loses while you drive it. That loss is value is called depreciation, and it's usually the biggest part of your monthly lease payment. For example, if a car costs 40,000 new and is expected to be worth 25,000 after 3 years, the 50,000 difference is what you are essentially paying to use the car. But depreciation isn't the only cost included in a leasing. There are few other things built into the payment as well. The second cost is the finance charge, which is similar to interest on a loan. Even though you are not buying the car, the leasing company still charges for the money they have tied up in the vehicle. The third cost is taxes, which vary depending on where you live and are often applied to each monthly payment. Finally, there are additional fees, such as acquisition fees, dealership fees, and sometimes end-of-lease charges. But to really understand whether leasing is good or bad, we need to run the numbers on a real car. To make this easier to understand, let's look at a real example using a Toyota RAV4, one of the most popular cars people lease today. Imagine the car has a price of about 35,000. A typical lease might last 36 months with a monthly payment of around 420 and a down payment of about 3,000 at signing. At first glance, that might seem like a reasonable deal because the monthly payment feels manageable compared to financing the entire vehicle. But remember, with a lease, you are mostly paying for depreciation. In this case, the leasing company might estimate that after 3 years, the car will still be worth 22,000. That remaining value is called the residual value, and it plays a big role in determining your monthly payment. So, over those 3 years, you are essentially paying for the difference between the original price and the residual value, plus some additional costs. And when you compare this to buying the same car, the numbers become really interesting. Now, let's look at what happens if you decide to buy the same car instead of leasing it. When you finance a car, you typically start with a down payment, which reduces the amount you need to borrow. For example, if the car costs 35,000 and you put 3,000 down, you would finance the remaining 32,000. When you choose a loan term, which is usually around 5 years, although some people choose shorter terms like 3 years to reduce the amount of interest they pay. The monthly payment will depend on the loan term and the interest rate offered by the bank or dealership. A longer loan usually means lower monthly payments, but you might pay more interest overall. On the other hand, a shorter loan increases the monthly payment but reduces the total cost over time. By the end of the loan, you fully own the car, which means you no longer have monthly payments. But the real question isn't just the monthly payment, it's how much the car actually costs you to drive. Now, let's compare the true cost of leasing versus buying over the same 3-year period. When people compare these options, they often only look at the monthly payment, but that doesn't show the full picture. What really matters is how much the car actually costs you to drive during that time. In our example, with a Toyota RAV4, after accounting for depreciation and the value the car still holds after 3 years, buying the car ends up costing about $2,600 per year to drive. That's the effective cost once you consider that you still own a vehicle with real value at the end of those 3 years. Now, compare that with leasing the same car. After adding the down payment and all the monthly payments, the cost comes out about $4,000 per year. That's a huge difference, which means that in this example, buying the car was significantly cheaper than leasing it. Now, early in this video, I mentioned that there is one situation where leasing can actually make more sense, and this is where comparison becomes more balanced, even though buying is often cheaper in the long run. Leasing can still be a better option in certain situations. For example, leasing sometimes works better with luxury cars that depreciate very quickly because the lease structure can protect you from some of that loss in value. It can also make sense for people who simply prefer driving a new car every 3 years, since leasing makes it easy to switch vehicles without dealing, selling, or trading in a car. In some cases, business owners may also benefit from leasing because certain payments can potentially be written off as business expenses, depending on the situation. And finally, leasing may work well for long mileage drivers who stay within the mileage limits and want predictable costs without long-term ownership. So, when we put everything together, the conclusion becomes fairly clear. For most people, buying a car is usually the better financial decision, especially if you plan to keep the vehicle for several years after the loan is paid off. Once the payments are finished, the car still has value, and you can continue driving it without a monthly cost, which dramatically lowers the long-term expense. Leasing, on the other hand, often means continuously making payments, while never actually owning the car. However, there are still situations where leasing can make sense, particularly if you prefer driving new cars every few years, or if you're dealing with luxury vehicles that depreciate quickly. So, in most situations, buying a car will save you thousands of dollars over time. But there's one huge mistake people make when buying cars that can cost them even more than leasing. And if you want to avoid that mistake, click the video on your screen right now.